Ça va très bien, merci. Et toi?
Ça va, ça va. Leave how Paulette and her work. I wanted to give a huge merci to all of you, our attendees. So while we're doing everything online with classes and events and Zoom and all of these things, it would really be impossible for us to continue without your support. So I'd specifically like to highlight two further events that are coming up. An evening with a French-born, award-winning, New York-based chef, Alain Briottet, on December 3rd, and Maison Lançon champagne tasting in person at La Voile Brookline on December 13th. So you can find all of the details and our myriad other events on our website, frenchculturalcenter.org, under the Events tab. So joining us today from Cape Cod to discuss her debut translation, we have Paulette Boudrot.
Bonjour tout le monde.
She has degrees in education, French language and literature, and 20th century French literature from Bridgewater State University, Middlebury College, and La Sorbonne. These programs set her up perfectly to be the English translator of Alain Briottet's Boston and Hiver. The reader follows a young French banker experiencing Boston for the first time as an intern downtown in the 1980s. He visits the city's varied establishments, including the center, which I absolutely loved reading about. And he rubs elbows with Boston Brahmins, academics, struggling musician, and a librarian, among others. Paulette has carefully translated these 12 stories to preserve the vivid images of winter and the author's keen eye for detail, offering a glimpse into Boston of the past and the heart and soul of the thoughtful narrator. So without further ado, welcome to all of you. Welcome to Paulette. Welcome to the Boston-Strasbourg Sister City Association, and specifically welcome to Madame Suki de Bragança, who welcomed her friend Alain Briottet to the center when he first published Boston, My Blissful Winter in French. So that's a fun fact for everybody visiting. So Clémence is going to share a quick message from Monsieur Briottet, author, storied diplomat, and commander of the French Legion of Honor, with us now. Merci, Clémence.
Merci, Ingrid. Hi. So Mr. Briottet couldn't be with us today, but he wanted to say a few words that I'm going to read in French for you. I will share my screen so you can read the English translation. If you have any issue reading the translation, please let us know in the chat. Thank you. I will share my screen. Chers amis, la traduction en anglais américain de mon livre « Boston, un hiver si court » vient de sortir sous le titre « Boston, My Blissful Winter » aux éditions PRA. On la doit à Paulette Boudrot, qui a fait un travail remarquable en nous donnant une version attentive, précise, élégante et fidèle. Je l'en remercie très sincèrement. Je voudrais également remercier les éditeurs, Lucinda Clark et Hélène Albanese, qui, malgré les contraintes imposées par la crise sanitaire que nous vivons tous, ont réussi à tenir les délais de publication. Avec le temps, les années 1980 apparaissent comme des années heureuses et fécondes. La paix et la prospérité régnaient sur Boston. Les nombreux étudiants qui fréquentaient ces universités lui donnaient entrain et joie de vivre. Il faisait bon de vivre dans cette ville à taille humaine. Le centenaire de la Statue de la Liberté, le bicentenaire de la Révolution de 1789, la venue du président de la République française multipliait les occasions de célébrer la France et l'amitié franco-américaine. Ces occasions m'ont permis aussi de découvrir les qualités des Bostoniens, attachés à leurs traditions mais tolérants, raisonnables et audacieux, toujours prêts à défendre la liberté et leur liberté. J'ai eu le bonheur de rencontrer des gens exceptionnels, comme j'en donne quelques exemples dans mon livre qui leur est dédié. Bien fidèlement, Alain Briottet.
What a lovely way to start our conversation. So I guess my first question for you, Paulette, is if you could tell us a bit about how you learned French and when you fell in love with the language to the point where, I mean, this book is in our hands, to the point where translation, I hope, became a passion for you.
Thank you, Ingrid. First of all, I'm a third generation. I come from a Franco-American family. I'm third generation. I learned French at a very young age. I am the oldest of 5 children. We were 4 children born in 5 years. So my parents, as the oldest, my parents started speaking French with me when I was an infant. And by the time the second and third child came along, they stopped. It was too difficult to maintain all of that. So, but I attended a French Catholic parochial school through elementary school and through high school. But the classes were in French, and we had religion classes in French, and many of our activities were also in French. But we went to, on Sundays, and especially holidays, we went to my grandfather's house, my grandparents, and every grandchild, I think we were 22 of us, was required or asked to either say a poem or sing a song or recite something or just, well, if we did it in French, my grandfather gave us a quarter. If we did it in English, we only got a dime. So that was a very strong incentive for me. But by the time I graduated from high school, I had had enough of French. As a matter of fact, I hated French. And I said, I am never going to speak French again. Then I got into college, and I decided to take it as an elective because it would be an easy way to get credits, extra credits towards graduation. But I had a mentor, a teacher, a professor was Franco-American background, and we were a small class. We were only 5 or 6 people in the class. It was in the 60s and late 50s, Sputnik had just been launched, and the whole educational process was, the focus had been on teaching languages, reading and writing. And with Sputnik, the whole tradition was changing, and they were starting to teach French in the elementary schools with the focus on reading, not only reading and writing, but speaking and understanding and speaking language. So our professor, stressed this to us, and to those of us who were majoring in elementary education also, and mentioned the FLES programs, which were foreign languages in the elementary schools. And they were started, at that time, they were being televised. So she told us how this would be a great opportunity for us. And I thought, oh yeah, that would be good. It'd be a great way for me to get a job more easily that way. So my second mentor was the chairman of the foreign language department in Northampton, Mass. And that was one of, I'm lost here. I lost my, that was one of three communities in Massachusetts that had FLES classes. And he was my second mentor. And while I was teaching there, traveling from one school to another in the elementary schools, he was also taught methodology at Middlebury College in Vermont, and encouraged me to sign up for the master's program at Middlebury, which I did. And through the summers, I went back there for 3 summers. And I think that's when I really started falling in love with French. It was a gradual process, but I really got to the point of loving French and everything about it. So I wouldn't say I became passionate about translation, but I did become passionate and determined. I became very determined to spend a year in France.
Good call. So this is your first translation project, and I'm so glad to be able to have it in my hands. I'm just going to keep showing it off over the course of the Zoom call. So you've told Clémence and I a bit about the process, but could you tell our audience how this came about and how you worked with the author?
Sure. It wasn't exactly my first translation, because over the years I had done a few translations and interpretations for business friends. But in the 80s, when Alain Briottet was the French Consul General of France in Boston, I was working at the Service Culturel, which is a department of the consulate. And he loved Boston so much that's how I met him while I was working there. But he loved Boston so much that he decided that he wanted to extend his stay. Now, the regular term of office for a consul general is 3 years, as we know. Somehow he was able to extend his stay to 5 years. So he was in Boston for 5 years, then went to Myanmar, which is Burma, and it was there that he wrote this book, and it was written in 1994. However, it wasn't published until 2007. So over the years, we corresponded, we kept in touch. Sometimes if he was in Boston, we would meet. And it happened in 2007, he asked me if I would translate the book, or if I could find someone to translate the book for him. Well, at the time, I was running my own business. I had started a business, and there was no way I had time to get involved in a translation project. So fast forward to 2014, 2015, around that time. And my husband and I were in Paris, and we met for a drink or something. And I said to him, did you ever find someone to translate your book? And he said, no. So I said, well, I think I'd like to try. By this time, I'd been retired for a few years, and I had a little bit of time on my hands. And I said, I think I'd like to try just to keep up with my French language skills. He said, well, do the first chapter and send it to me. So I did. I came back home, did the first chapter, and sent it to him. And he said, continuez. And that's how we started. So the initial process was chapter by chapter. We communicated by email. I did a chapter, I would send it to him, he'd send it back, we'd make comments. So this went on for almost the entire book. Then that same year, I got a notice from Middlebury that their Breadloaf Writers Conference, which is quite popular, they were having their first Breadloaf Translators Conference. So I decided to apply, and I was accepted into a workshop at the Breadloaf Translators Conference. And by then, we had almost finished translating the entire book. Well, I got there and got into my workshop, and guess what? We had done a literal translation when it should have been a literary translation. So the difference between a literal translation and a literary translation is that it's almost word for word. For example, later on, I also found out that I should have readers. Readers should take, look at the English version. And I remember asking Mary Louise Burke to be one of the readers, and she read it, and her comment was, oh my gosh, this is in English. I'm reading English words, but it feels like I'm reading French. So that kind of explains the difference between a literary and a literal translation. Some other words you want to know, the challenges about words and concepts and slang and things that are not translatable. The structure is different. The structure of the language is different. The placement of the phrases and the sentences is different. Adjectives, the position of the adjectives is different. The verb tenses, well, in French, you have le passé simple, le passé parfait, l'imparfait. We don't have, in English, we don't have the literary past, which is the passé simple. That doesn't exist. Also contractions. There are no contractions of the verbs in French. For example, it's I will, he. If you say il est, je suis. But in English, we say I'll or he's or there instead of they are. So if you're translating it literally, you're saying I will, he will, they will. So I had, over the course of I had people reading, and especially people who were seasoned translators or critiques or professors, and they said, this is too formal. This is much too formal. And I had learned, well, you had to keep the voice of the author. And I would argue back and forth. Well, the author is a formal person. I have to keep his voice. And after 2 or 3 people said, it has to be written. It's being written in English. It's being written in American English for an English reader, for an American English reader. So then I agreed and went back and changed everything. So you have to know your audience. You have to know who your audience is, who you're writing for. And in this particular case, I was writing American English for American readers. So as far as slang, in the old days, now when I first started, I had a French dictionary, French and English dictionary, a dictionary of a thesaurus, a dictionary of I don't know, synonyms. I had all these books next to me, and that's how I was working. And that was over 5 years ago. But since then, everything has become computerized, and it's so easy. Now, one of the examples of things that are hard to translate, that are not translatable from French to English, in the 4th chapter about the Feast of Kings, La Fête des Rois, it's a story about a young war bride and her husband and how they met. And in the French, it says they met at the Hôtel de Ville in an organization, at a reception organisée par une association de marraines de guerre. Marraines de guerre. Godmothers of war. What is that? So I had to ask the translator. I had to, Monsieur Briottet. We went back at least 2 or 3 times, back and forth, trying for me to be able to understand what was les marraines de guerre. We spent so much time doing that. Finally, we decided to keep it in French. So it's in French, and it says, by an association of young women, les marraines de guerre de Paris, comma, who corresponded with soldiers. Now, it took us a lot of time to do that. Recently, I said, I didn't use Google in those days. So I Googled it just a few days ago in preparing for this. 2 minutes, it was all explained. So there's a big difference right now. If you can Google everything, you Google something in French and it comes up. I found out that Les Marraines de Guerre started with World War I. It was continued into World War II. When World War II came along, and it's women who corresponded with men, soldiers, to keep their morale. So all that time that we had spent. So that is how you can use Google. Or I also would ask a native French speaker to explain something if I didn't quite get it. So now there's even slang. Now you can Google French slang dictionary, or you can Google French slang translated into English. So everything is available. So there are machine translations such as Google Translate, which really is not that good. I would not use that. But there are also things called CAT, computer-assisted translations. And I use a translation site, app, that gives me many different words for a word. And also it puts the words into both in English and in French in paragraphs or in sentences so that you can get the right sense about it.
Very interesting stuff. I love the idea of just like the stack of reference materials next to you.
Oh, I had every book, and I had the French versions and the English versions, and looking at French synonyms and English synonyms.
A lot of cross-referencing.
That was 5 years ago, and I don't know if Google wasn't around, or if I didn't use it as much, but right now you can use it. It's much more easier.
So we're getting kind of a sense of like how the translation worked and how you were working on it. But do you have a specific routine for the translating work, and how do you kind of approach this kind of project?
Well, I just made sure I had a block of time. First of all, I read the book in the source language in French, read the whole book. And then I went back and broke it down into chapters or even sections. And I had to make sure that I had at least 2 hours, a block of 2 hours of time to work on something. So I would work on it and then I would put it aside. I would come back and work on it again, and then put it aside. So I went through the whole process, but the process was always go back, make changes, put it aside. Go back, make changes, put it aside. Go back, make changes. You get the idea. You know what it's like. But then putting it aside for a long time was important also. And not referring back to the French, putting aside and just reading the English and reading it out loud. Sometimes, you read something, you've written something, you read it in English and you read it out loud. That doesn't sound right. When you read it out loud, it just doesn't sound the same way.
Very interesting. So again, I'm just going to show off this book here, but can you share a bit about how this book in its current form comes to be in our hands in English with this audience today. Once your translation was finished, like what was the process to get it published? That whole kind of behind the scenes information there.
Okay, so it started, first of all, it started when I was at Bread Loaf at the Translators Conference, and my workshop leader, suggested, besides working on the text and knowing that I had to go back and do the whole thing all over again and change it from literal to literary, she suggested that I join ALTA, which is the American Literary Translators Association, which I did. And they have wonderful resources. And as a member, they have a publishers database. And on the publishers database, you can look up the publishers by their preferred languages, what language they publish in, the genre of the book that they publish in, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, journals, magazines, or full books, how they specialize with the contact person and the title of the person. Also, how long it will take for them to get back to you if you send in a query letter. So, for example, some publishers said, it will take us at least 6 weeks to get back to you, or it will take us 2 months to get back to you. Or it'll take you. So you knew you didn't have to bug them. You didn't have to go back and say, well, I haven't heard from you yet. So that was a good part of having that. So I took everything, all that information, and I put it on a worksheet and listed, I had about between 20 and 30 publishing companies set on a worksheet with all this information that I was going to contact. And I started doing that. And then I started tracking the rejections, a lot of rejections. But there were two publishers that were interested. And one of them was very persistent. She kept calling and she kept calling. So I looked her up. I looked up the name of the company on Google. I knew how to do that. So I looked her up. I found it was a small company in Georgia. And I noticed that she was a Rotarian. Well, I'm a Rotarian also. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. But not only was she a Rotarian, she was a past president of her Rotary Club. So at that time, it was just around that time, Monsieur Briottet was in Boston, and he had just come back from Montreal, where he had spoken to a Rotary group there. And I had, as a Rotarian, had just made a commitment to be executive secretary to the incoming district governor. And that was a 2.5 year commitment. So I told Monsieur Briottet, I said, I have to put this project aside for a couple of years. I said, I just made this commitment to Rotary. And he understood because he had just spoken to a Rotary group. And then Lucinda, who was the publisher, called, and I told her also, I said, I have to put this aside for 2 years. So I did. The whole project was put aside for about 2 or 2.5 years. So fast forward, now it's like 2018. And I'm ready to get back to looking for a publisher. But truthfully, I wanted a bigger publisher. I wanted a better known publisher. But guess what? Lucinda called me again. So at that point, I decided, well, this must be fate. This is meant to be. Besides, I didn't feel like going through the whole process of sending query letters out again. So we talked, we negotiated a contract, and we started working on the project. But something that surprised me before we ever got to the editing process, she had me start preparing a media kit for publicity, writing about the author, about the translator, about the book. She also making a list of all the places that I would contact for publicity, including the French Cultural Center. That was all. And where the book would be publicized. She outsourced, because it was a small company, she outsourced a lot of the projects, the cover of the book. So I submitted some photos. I went online and got pictures of Boston, submitted some photos, but she outsourced the cover of the book to a graphic designer from Publishers Weekly, which was very interesting because that graphic designer took some of the pictures that I took, redesigned them, and then used that as a commentary for other graphic designers, commenting on why she selected certain colors, why she put the picture, the picture much larger of the. So that was kind of interesting. She also outsourced the editing process, but before that, she even had me record excerpts from 4 different chapters to put on her website, my website. So then we finally got to the editing process. which was outsourced. So I worked with an editor and I worked with her assistant, and we went back and forth and back and forth. And finally, we had what we thought was the final edited copy ready. And I sent it to Lucinda. She called me back. She said, I'm going to drop chapter 5, a chapter about Kerouac. I was horrified. That was Monsieur Briottet's favorite chapter. Oh my gosh. I said, well, can you tell me why? Can you be very specific? And she said, well, it's very confusing. There are a lot of characters. There are too many characters and it's very confusing. And I thought about it for a while and I said, well, you're right. It's written, the author writes it through a stream of consciousness. So there's the present, there's the past, there's the passé simple, there's the passé composé, the past, what is it in French? Passé. Anyway, and there was even a dream sequence. So I said, all right, let me work on this again. Don't make a decision right now. Let me work on this again. So at that point, I worked on it again and I dropped the dream sequence and I said to I told Monsieur Briottet, I said, I'm going to drop the dream sequence. And he said, why? No. I really had that dream. I said, I had to remind him that this was supposed to be fiction. This is fiction. And also that the dream sequence really didn't add to the story, that particular story. So he agreed. And I went back, changed it, made some changes, sent it back to Lucinda. She called back. She said, well, that's a lot better, but I'm still thinking of dropping it. I thought, oh my gosh, I could not tell him. So I had a plan B, but it was very important for me to maintain a good relationship with Monsieur Briottet, the author, and also to maintain a good relationship with the publisher. So I had met someone in the Société Francophone de Cape Cod. At this point, she was just an acquaintance, and she was a freelance editor. So I called her. Her name is Ellen Albanese. I called her. I said, "Would you take a look at this chapter and tell me, see what you think?" So she did, and she made some changes, and we discussed it, and she made some more changes, and we sent it to Lucinda. Lucinda called back. She loved it. She loved it so much that she hired Ellen to go back and edit the whole book, go back over the whole manuscript again, and kind of put the finishing touches on it. And I like to say that Ellen Albanese, the final editor, put the icing on the cake and kind of put the finishing touches on it. So at that point, Monsieur Briottet was happy, Lucinda was happy, Ellen was happy, everybody was happy. So that is how the book got to be.
Amazing. So we are actually starting to get some questions in the chat, but I figured I would just finish off our part of the conversation by saying we positioned you as kind of like the spokesperson for translators in our title for this event. But do you have any advice for translators who are maybe starting out or interested in the field?
Right, and as you know, this is my debut translation, so it's my really first one. So, but I've been the most important thing I think is getting involved with a community of translators, which is easier now than it was 5 years ago, because now you have you have all virtual meetings. So there's ALTA, the American Literary Translators Association. There's a New England Literary Translators Association. There's a Boston Literary Translators Group that meets. And I did meet with them 5 years ago, the first time, and they meet at supper at night. They have a potluck supper and you bring in your work and you critique each other's work. And that was wonderful. But I was on the Cape and it was winter time. It was hard for me to drive up there alone at night. So, but now I'm getting involved with that group again because they're starting to meet virtually. There's a group called the Emerging Literary Translators Association. There are many others, and that's the main advice: get involved with a group of translators. And because I didn't, before going really virtual, I also was involved with a literary group at the Sandwich Arts Alliance, and they were just writers. But other things, have people read your work if you're translating, and they don't necessarily have to know the French. These are called readers, and to go over your work and usually select someone to make sure it's well written in English. And I selected people who wrote well in or English professors or English people who majored in English in college. Also, as you noticed in the last a little while ago, put your work aside, and go back before going back to it. And when you go back to it, don't refer to the foreign language unless something really comes up. And when you get to the point, that you start sending query letters to publishers, one thing I learned, first of all, was that English authors, send a whole manuscript to a publisher in their query letter. Translators, you just send the first chapter or the first 30 pages. Well, I had done the whole thing, so now I know, just send the first chapter or the first 30 pages. But when you send query letters, be patient, keep at it. Just keep sending them. Don't take the rejections personally and just keep at it.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Paulette. So now we have some questions in the chat. And if you want to ask a question verbally, you can either raise your hand or use the reactions button, so that way I can see who has their questions. But our first question is from Anne-Marie, and she would like to know, what CAT tools do you prefer?
I haven't actually used any, there are some CAT tools that are designed specifically for translators where the texts are parallel. And I just learned about this recently at the recent ALTA conference. But what I've been using is just the translation, and I guess you would call it a CAT tool, is Reverso. And that's a translation site that gives you many different options for a word and the use and that's what I've been using. But there are other professionals, and if I have the name and I can't remember it now, I think it's Studio. I'd have to look into my notes if you want the name of the real cats, and I can get that information to anyone who wants it. So just email me and I'll be happy to get that to you.
Great. So we have Gilbert who would like to know, bonjour, you mentioned that when going from a literal translation to a literary one, everything changed. Would you have a specific example of the two versions that you could show us or tell us about? Other than Anaren, which I think is a very interesting.
Okay.
And I think, I'm sorry, and I think it goes with the last question. I think they're very connected. So I think you could anyway.
I haven't, I really can't. It was mostly just the way sentences were constructed and the position of the, changing the phrases to the beginning of the sentence instead of the end, or the way the structure of the languages. And the best way to do that after is to get to read it out loud, especially if you're a native English speaker. If you're not a native English speaker, get someone to read it. And the readers are very important. And I would like to acknowledge them at the end of this, because there were many readers that I had, which I didn't realize the first time. But, and I don't have anything that jumps out at me right now, but except for the Marine de Guerre, which that was one thing that I do remember. I'd have to think about it. And I would have to look back at both texts, because as I said, I put the French text aside and then I work on the English. And I don't go back to the French unless someone asks me a specific question.
Then our next question is from Sab, who says, how long did it take you to complete the translation and how many hours did you put in daily? So that is a bit scattered over the 5 years, I think you said.
Right. Well, but the whole process was 5 years. But remember, I put it aside for about 2 or 2.5 years where I did absolutely nothing on it. So I would say the whole process took 3 years. But I did not do it full time. There are professional translators who translate, literary translators. This is their main source of income. I started this in my retirement. So it's not first of all, you don't look for income if you're going to be a translator or even an author. I would spend, at minimum of 2 hours, blocks of 2 hours. Some translators that I've known who translate full time, and that's their main source of income. They, have a routine. They start in the morning, they stop for lunch, they take a break, go for a walk or do something, come back and do it and work on it again. but it depends where you are in your life, how you're treating your translation. You can get too enmeshed in it. After a while, you just have to put it aside and then come back to it. And that's the main thing. As many times as you go back to it, you can change something.
All right. We also have a question from Dominique. Can you say a few words about the way you created the title? So from Boston, Un hiver si court to Boston, My Blissful Winter.
So that's another example of Boston, Un hiver si court. So a literal translation would be Boston, a winter too short, which really wasn't catchy in French. And the more I thought about it, and Monsieur Briottet and I went back and forth on this, and I had a list, and I recall I made a list of suggestions. I had a number of suggestions, and I told him, "You make a list." And I was in Paris, and we met, and we compared our list. And this was one title that he really wanted. He really wanted Boston, My Blissful Winter. That's what he wanted. I said, all right. And he said he had asked some people, and some people thought it was good. Other people thought, I said, well, I think you have to, what would be more descriptive would be Boston, My Blissful Winter, Memories of the 1980s. So that was my contribution to the title, the memories of, because I think the book, all the short stories, the 12 short stories reflect the 1980s. And that's an important part of the whole book.
Very true. Although I will say that they do kind of marry with the present very well. There's themes and of course, places that are very much still in place in Boston today. So for those of you who've read the book, you might kind of have a sense of what I'm talking about there.
Right.
I can't tell if I heard a voice or, Dominique?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to say that it's really more of an interpretation of the title than a switch from literal to literary, actually.
Right. So a lot of translators, that gets into, there's a whole question, a whole domain of how much liberty a translator has in the translation, and and it depends on the translator, him or herself, and it also depends on whether the author is alive or in the public domain. So that would make a big difference also.
And in this case, you cooperated a lot with Mr.
Yes, with Monsieur Briottet, with the author, because I wanted to maintain, a good relationship with him. And it was like it's very hard for an author or even a translator, because it's like your child. It's like, to make changes. And it was a first experience for the both of us. So changing some things, that the word was not exact, but that's the way he's like the dream. Well, that really happened, So that it's a very, I don't know, it's a situation that's very, I don't know the word I'm looking for, precarious in some ways, that you want to, because the important thing is to maintain the relationship with the author. And that was very important to me, but also to make it in readable English, or English for Americans, so that it would be, so that when you read it, you wouldn't say, oh yeah, this is a translation. I read a lot of books in translation from other languages, and I can tell by reading, you get to certain sentences, you say, oh, you can tell this was translated. And so now my mind is, oh, I would have said this instead.
So we do have Catherine with her hand raised, and I think we have a couple of questions, but pass it off to Catherine first.
Thank you, Ingrid. Paulette, I'm wondering, before you turned your manuscript over to the readers, the official readers, and you finished a 2-hour segment, let's say, did you feel like, oh, I need to go back and change that? Did you ever get, quasi obsessive about, no, that can be better, that can be better, that can be better?
No,
and I have to change before I go on.
All right, by the time I got to the point where I asked readers to look at the chapters, at that point, I hadn't really converted from literal to literary. So the readers were part of the process that helped me transition and understand the difference between literal and literary. So they were a very important part, and some of them around the Zoom talk today. I think
Mhm.
Leah, no, not Leah, Margaret, what is Margaret on? Or Melissa is on. Melissa Demarche was one of my readers. I'm trying to
But
remember.
then once you switched to the literary, once you knew that you were on the right track and you were doing the literary translation, did you ever feel like, oh, it's not perfect enough. I've got to
Right.
change that before I stop.
Yes, that's what I was saying before. The advice to translators: put it aside, go back, change, go back, put it aside. That's the whole process. And at some point, you
Okay.
have to say stop. You know?
Okay, okay,
that's
that's
where-
the answer to my question. And I have another very quick question, Paulette. I think I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. As you look back on your career, do you wish that you had chosen a career as a translator instead of what you did?
I never would have been able to support myself and my children.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That was
that's
the answer I thought was coming.
yeah. As a
Thank
matter of
you.
fact, when I was one of my one thought that I had, you know, when I was in college or when looking at careers, I thought I would like to be an interpreter. I thought, oh, I would like to be an interpreter at the UN. Wow. But then I found out at the time, in order to be an interpreter at the UN, you needed to be fluent in at least 3 or 4 different languages. And at that time, I was spending so much time trying to become fluent in French that I said, forget it.
So I think I saw a hand from Kay McAloon.
Ken, hi everybody.
Welcome.
Yeah, now the prose, your prose is exquisite. I mean, it's finely chiseled, and it's very elegant in its simplicity, and that fits well with the voyeurism, I think, of the stories. And in fact, the first literary reference that came to my mind as I started reading the first story was Thomas Mann. And now yourself, I mean, maybe it's a silly question, but were you channeling or thinking in terms of any, you know, literary influences, French or American or European?
No, I was just trying to get the words and the sentences and get the whole meaning and the feeling. I was trying to just get the feeling and the culture and into English. That's all. I did not think of any literary references because I was just trying to get it into to put it on paper so that it would represent exactly how the author was feeling and what he was doing and what he wanted to communicate.
Although I think we can point to the Kerouac chapter again and say that he was really inspired by Kerouac in that chapter.
Can you raise my hand or
No,
no?
you
You did on
very
chat.
interesting, I imagine, as a translator, to kind of keep both the
No.
author you know and a very famous author.
No,
in mind.
just
Well,
say.
No, absolutely. It's a great chapter. And yes, it's right. It's a pôle d'attraction.
There. Just start typing now.
So I think we also had a question from
Did not-
Jeanette. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no. I was just comment about the title. Back to the title, which I think is a beautiful title. And obviously, I mean, it changed a lot because you went from it made it by saying my blissful winter, made it a very personal memoir, which I think draws in the reader immediately. And then blissful is a much more personal also kind of word than court. It's a sort of measure that, you know. So I think it's a lot more, it makes it a lot more personal and draws you in, I think, which I think is very smart. It was very clever.
Right, thank you. And I'm
Bonjour, Paulette.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Bonjour. I agree with Alain. I never realized that the chapter on Lowell and Kerouac was his favorite, but I hope he has never known how close it came to being omitted.
He does know because he's heard, you know, and this seems to be a point of interest in everybody who hears the story, and he does know. And his remark is, "Mais vous avez gagné."
I'm sure he found it very amusing.
But I tell him, no, je n'ai pas gagné, c'était un compromis.
Well, it was brilliant that you found that other source
Yes.
who was able to give you some good, ability to rearrange things. But I have always loved it because it is so richly peopled with characters, and also it almost has that stream of consciousness flow that you alluded to. It is more complex, and I don't know whether Alain was really doing something deliberate to, in a way, be kind of a beat writer, but you raised that point today, and I find it very interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah. The personal part, I think we were planning to talk, Ingrid, about, you were going to ask me about how closely his bank working narrator reflects his experiences in Boston. And, I think he probably would be the person who could best answer that question. But personally, I recognize a lot of the characters in the book, and some of them are named specifically, and others are there with fictional names, but I still recognize them. But there are places, of course, that I recognize, the brunch at the Ritz, and I remember going to jazz clubs, and I remember concerts at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and driving to Harvard Square. Oh my gosh, I lived in Quincy, and if you take the Southeast Expressway, the extension, and you get off at Cambridge, and you have to take that left onto Starrow Drive to get to the Anderson Bridge to get in the rain. I did that so many times, and just writing that and reading it, it's like I relive that experience every time. So in the French Library, of course, which was the French Cultural Center at the time, the French Library, there was so many times that I went there for events, and they're listed in the book. They're talked about in the book so often. So all of the events, what I don't know is how much the stories about the banker that are connected with these places actually happened, or how much is fiction. And I think only the author can tell you that.
Oui, sorry, of your emails. Saint-Onge. Ah, vous êtes muté. You're muted.
Wait a minute. Can you hear me?
There you go. Yes.
Yes. Paulette, that was just a wonderful presentation. I'm wondering, as a Native American speaker, would you be comfortable translating from English to French, or does that really require a native?
Well, interesting that you should mention that. I always thought I would never even attempt to translate to French. However, a friend has asked me recently, and I have translated a poem into French. And I thought, oh, that wasn't so bad. I thought it came out pretty good. And then I've also translated, I'm working on a short story that I've translated, that I'm translating into French. So, but I don't know that I would do it. If I did, then I would have to have not only native speakers review it, but people who translate from English to French to review it, or an editor that translates from, I just wouldn't put it out there. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, well, I've been working on a book in English about a French resistance fighter. I don't know if I'll ever get it published, but if I do, I have a feeling that it might have a bigger readership in France than it would here, and so I've been thinking about, that's part of the reason I was interested in your presentation, to learn about translation. But anyway, you've obviously done a beautiful job. How is the book doing?
I think it's doing well. There are some issues with the distributor, and I'm not going to go into details, but it's available. I was going to tell you at the end where it's available. Some of the smaller independent bookstores are having a problem getting it from the distributor, and we're working on trying to solve that. But I think it's doing okay. And it's so nice to see you, Navian. It's been years.
I know one thing is that my partner is Marshall Smith of the Brookline Booksmith, and I don't know if the Brookline Booksmith is carrying it, but we can certainly help you to make sure that happens.
Well, that would be good. I will connect with you offline, because they are on my list, but I have hesitated. when we first started publishing it in July, August, everything was fine. Then all of a sudden everything switched. And I don't know if it's because of COVID or, but the whole publishing industry, I'm told, is having a hard time. But I will try, I'm holding off on getting in touch with some of those smaller bookstores, but it's very nice to know that you have a connection there. So I will be in touch with you, Marie.
Okay, great.
So we do have a question from Stephanie in the chat about, did the translation process bring back memories of your childhood use of French?
I don't know if it brought back memories of my childhood use of French, because once I got into college and once I got into college and into Middlebury and got into the French, I continued using my French. I can continue using, so it wasn't bringing back the childhood aspects of my French, but more, and even now with the Société Francophone de Cape Cod, we meet monthly and we speak French. And ici on parle français, and you can't, you're not allowed to speak English. So that, and I do a lot with them. So that keeps me going in French too.
Then Anne would like to know if the readers are professionals.
They are at the time, no, they were friends that I knew who were either professors of English or had majored in English, or who wrote very well, who I knew wrote very well. But I would probably, now that based on I would probably ask professors or people, definitely people who had majored in English, or even other authors or other translators. I think I would ask other translators to be readers.
Then we have Dominique, who has a detail. Would like to know, is Francos a well-known word in English? So she didn't know it in French, and she is French. Maybe Francos.
Yeah.
Is that a well-known word in English?
Well, this has been interesting because Monsieur Briottet and I have gone back and forth on this, a lot. And I cannot speak for a native French person, but I had never heard Franco-American people called Francos. And he uses the term Franco throughout the book. And I did not want to use it. So, but he said, no, it's Franco. So I use Franco throughout. But to me, being brought up as a Franco-American in the United States, we were always called Franco-American or Canuck, slang Canuck. But I had never heard us called Franco. And when you think of Franco, I think of the Spanish, the Spanish War and that. But so maybe someone who is a native French person can reply to that. But he was.
No, I am a native French person, and I have never heard this Franco word except to Franco, as you said, or the Francos, les Francopholies, the festival, music festivals, singing festivals. But it's the only reference of Francos that I know. So I discovered the word in the book, in Mr. Briottet's book. So
the French cover.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
If I can say something, Ingrid.
Of course.
Hello, Paulette. I'm Barbara. I'm the Executive Director at the French Cultural Center. So thank you very much for the presentation. About Franco, to add to the polemique, I know that it has been used consistently also by some French consuls in Boston. So I think that it is this phenomenon, like when you live in a certain area for a while, you just make up your own words when you are like in an in-between world. And I know that sometimes I shorten, words that would be more, evidently taken from a Québécois than a French person.
Right.
So that's just my 2 cents.
Idiolect more. Yes. Okay.
That's very interesting. That would explain that it's part. So that word Frank, that would explain to me that the word Franco is part of the diplomatic culture, the French diplomatic culture, that it's used in diplomatic circles. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
In Lowell, does it have a negative connotation or a positive connotation?
In Lowell, I don't know.
Because it's a pattern, immigrant groups, get nicknames,
Yeah.
and sometimes they have a positive connotation, sometimes usually it's a negative connotation, to be honest.
Right.
We did also have another question from Barbara, but in the chat this time about your next project. So you've spoken a little bit about poetry and short stories, but do you have kind of a project on the horizon?
Several years ago, I started, right now I'm very busy promoting this book. I never realized how much time would be involved in promoting this book and giving talks to different groups. And but I had started working on Monsieur Briottet's second book about 2 or 3 years ago when it first came out. And so that's sitting there. It's sitting there. But I do want to continue translating. I do want to continue translating.
Wonderful. So do we have, let me just check through all of the attendees. Was it nombreux? Do we have any other hands up or any further questions from the crowd? So I guess my final question then is, we have, does the author plan to have the book translated in other languages from Mireille? I don't know if you know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
But
I would think he would have to find a translate. It took him a long time to find me to translate the book, so I don't know if it will be translated into other languages.
So maybe for that question.
Right.
But the last question here is, where can viewers get a copy of the book and where can they find you?
Oh, okay. Well, as I mentioned before, there's only two independent bookstores that I know of that are carrying it right now. And one is the 8 Cousins in Falmouth and the Market Street Bookstore in Mashpee. But the big traditional stores such as Amazon, you can get it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. There's an online store called bookbaby.com and you can get it there. You can request it from your library. Now, if your library doesn't have it, your local library, they can order it. Usually they can order it. And if you want a signed copy, you can contact me at pauletteboudrot@gmail.com and I will sell you a signed copy and mail it to you. I'm also available to talk to your book club or to other organizations to do similar presentations to other organizations. I have a PowerPoint where I've gone through each chapter and done a pictorial synopsis of each chapter, or just pictures for each chapter to help a discussion for clubs that, if people have already read the book. And you can go on to my website, which is pauletteboudrot.com, and there you will find more details about the author, his extensive biography and mine also. You'll find the excerpts that were there, other events that are coming up. So there's just a lot more information if you want more information on my website. So, and I think I really want to thank all my readers, and the readers who are here today are Mary Louise and Melissa. I don't think Margaret White's is on, and also people who have sent in praise that are part of the beginning of the book. Suki, thank you so much. And Leah Pulfu, Betsy, I think Betsy is on. Thank you so much for sending this in so that it's part of the beginning of the book, the praise for, and that was praise for the French version. And thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, we get 3 whole pages of praise. So it's a very praiseworthy book. We highly recommend it. I'm hoping that we can tempt you into coming back and doing a book club with us. I know a couple of people in the chat have already read the book, so we could get more in depth with chit-chatting about the different stories, as you said, with pictorial elements. So we also had someone mention that they purchased the book from Harvard Bookstore. So if anyone wants to make that pilgrimage to Harvard Square, that
they
could.
bought it at the Harvard Cool?
I just at Harvard Bookstore, so I'm not sure which one. but-
Okay, okay. Well, that's good to know.
Pardon, she said she ordered, but eventually
ordered.
we could
Okay,
get back to
Okay.
a pilgrimage that way.
And Barbara, I just sent you a book. There's a book in the mail coming to you.
Very exciting. Alrighty, well, in that case, I would like to say the biggest thank you to all of our attendees today. You are, as I mentioned, nombreux. It's been lovely to speak with you this morning. And of course, the biggest thank you to Paulette for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been wonderful seeing a lot of faces I haven't seen in a long time, and just having this opportunity to, for me, bringing back memories. That's the important. The book does the feedback that I have gotten from everyone, or the feedback I get most often is that now the book, the stories trigger, and in addition to the places and the story that is told, it triggers personal memories for people who are reading it, and it projects them into that. One person even called me and said, "Oh, it's so nostalgic." She said, and he had lived in Boston. He said, "So nostalgic. It even borders on making me sad because I missed my time in Boston." So, so thank you to everyone.
Merci.
Au revoir.
Merci beaucoup.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Bonne journée, bon week-end.
Ingrid. Au revoir.
Merci. Bye, Margaret.